In a courtroom that had been tense from the very beginning, the spectacle surrounding Jasmine Crockett's case took a turn that few could have predicted, as Judge Thomas, known for his strict rulings and uncompromising demeanor, announced a staggering fine of $500 million against her, a sum so enormous that the entire room seemed to pause in collective disbelief, with lawyers, journalists, and observers alike struggling to process the unprecedented nature of the penalty. Yet what unfolded next demonstrated Crockett's remarkable presence of mind and rhetorical skill, as she rose calmly from her seat addressing the judge and jury. With a combination of logic, emotion, and unassailable legal reasoning that slowly began to shift the energy in the courtroom. And while some of the fine's supporters in the gallery initially clutched their notes and whispered agreements, it quickly became clear that Crockett was capturing the attention of everyone present, using every nuance of her argument, every pause and inflection, and every meticulously prepared piece of evidence to demonstrate that not only was the fine disproportionate, but that the judge's own handling of the case had been flawed in ways that undermined the fairness and integrity of the court. And as she continued, the whispers transformed into audible murmurs of approval, with even members of the press noting the dramatic shift in perception as Judge Thomas's authority seemed to waver. His once imposing aura met with polite yet firm pushback from the very figure he had sought to penalize. And this cascading effect on the courtroom dynamic was intensified by Crockett's use of historical precedents, legal documents, and persuasive, ethical arguments, each delivered with a clarity and poise that made it increasingly difficult for anyone to question the validity of her stance, while simultaneously highlighting the potential overreach by the judge. And as the tension escalated, spectators began to feel a sense of collective empowerment, realizing that the balance of justice could indeed be challenged when confronted with reasoned and passionate advocacy, with the cameras capturing every subtle expression, every flicker of doubt crossing the faces of court officials, and the scene became a viral sensation almost instantly. As snippets of the courtroom confrontation circulated on social media platforms, news outlets, and streaming services, creating a national conversation around the intersection of judicial authority, individual rights, and the limits of fines imposed without full consideration of proportionality and circumstance. And by the time Crockett concluded her remarks, the courtroom had transformed from a site of impending financial ruin to a theater of intellectual and moral persuasion, leaving Judge Thomas visibly unsettled as the court itself seemed to collectively realign its perception of fairness, accountability, and the true weight of power in the hands of those who wield it. With attorneys, legal scholars, and ordinary citizens debating endlessly about the implications of the case, not just for Crockett herself, but for the broader justice system. And the ripples of her performance were destined to be studied and remembered as a landmark moment in legal history, illustrating how one individual, armed with knowledge, composure, and determination, could not only challenge an authority figure but fundamentally shift the energy, perception, and ultimate outcome of an entire courtroom. Asterisk following the dramatic courtroom confrontation, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense anticipation to something almost electric, as attendees and observers processed the sheer audacity and effectiveness of Jasmine Crockett's response to the $500 million fine levied by Judge Thomas, with legal analysts immediately noting that her combination of precise legal knowledge, persuasive argumentation, and undeniable charisma had not only highlighted the disproportionate nature of the penalty, but had also subtly exposed weaknesses in the judge's procedural approach, a point that was not lost on the jury, who sat forward listening intently to every word, while journalists feverishly typed notes and recorded video clips, knowing that these moments would dominate news cycles for weeks to come. And as social media exploded with commentary, hashtags, and video snippets, public sentiment began to coalesce around Crockett's side, with commentators, influencers, and ordinary citizens alike praising her poise, courage, and eloquence, framing her actions as a stand for fairness, equity, and accountability in a system too often seen as favoring authority figures over individuals. And the conversation quickly expanded beyond the specifics of the fine itself to broader debates about judicial overreach, the ethics of imposing extreme financial penalties, and the role of personal agency in challenging institutional power, with legal experts weighing in on the nuances of her argument, citing precedents, statutes, and ethical guidelines, while activists and advocacy groups seized the moment to highlight systemic issues that have long gone unnoticed. And within the courtroom itself, the effect of Crockett's reasoning became increasingly apparent as the judge, who initially appeared unflappable, began to show signs of unease, adjusting his posture, hesitating in his responses, and casting glances that betrayed a dawning awareness that his authority was being questioned in a way that could not be easily dismissed. And as the hearing progressed, the interplay between Crockett and Judge Thomas became almost theatrical, a careful dance of legal strategy, moral persuasion, and personal conviction, where every carefully chosen word carried weight and every pause served to emphasize the inequities of the situation, creating a palpable tension that resonated not only within the walls of the courtroom but across digital platforms, news outlets, and public discourse, fostering a narrative in which a single individual, armed with intelligence, preparation, and unwavering composure, could catalyze widespread scrutiny of power structures, influence public opinion, and ultimately shift the trajectory of a case that initially seemed entirely dictated by judicial authority. With viewers and readers around the nation debating the merits of her arguments, the responsibilities of judges, and the potential ramifications for future cases, while the courtroom itself remained a focal point for an unfolding saga of resilience, strategy, and the dramatic interplay between justice and personal agency, leaving no doubt that Jasmine Crockett's response to the $500 million fine would be remembered as a defining moment in legal history and a case study in how eloquence, preparation, and moral clarity can confront even the most intimidating displays of power. As the courtroom drama reached its crescendo, Jasmine Crockett's deft navigation of legal arguments combined with her unflinching moral stance began to reshape the dynamics of the entire trial, with spectators noting how her meticulous preparation and ability to anticipate counterarguments allowed her to systematically dismantle the reasoning behind Judge Thomas's unprecedented $500 million fine, presenting a compelling narrative that framed the fine not merely as a punitive measure, but as an overreach of judicial authority that threatened broader principles of fairness and due process, a point that resonated with the jury, court officials, and the media alike, generating an atmosphere of intense scrutiny and discourse both inside and outside the courtroom, as pundits and legal experts debated the implications of Crockett's performance and the potential precedent it could set for challenging exorbitant penalties imposed by judges in future cases, while social media platforms erupted with clips, analyses, and commentary, magnifying the impact of her eloquent responses and strategic interjections, which were praised not only for their intellectual rigor, but also for their persuasive clarity, as she masterfully balanced technical legal reasoning with passionate advocacy, connecting with a broad audience who increasingly viewed her as a symbol of courage and resistance against disproportionate authority. And even as Judge Thomas attempted to regain control of the proceedings, Crockett's measured, calm, and commanding presence continually shifted the focus, highlighting the limits of his authority and underscoring the importance of accountability, transparency, and checks within the judicial system, which in turn sparked broader discussions among academics, policymakers, and civic organizations about the mechanisms in place to prevent abuse of power and ensure that justice serves the principles of equity and reason. While the courtroom observers, journalists, and legal commentators documented every reaction, noting the subtle yet undeniable way Crockett's interventions had created a momentum that made the judge reconsider his position. And as the session drew to a temporary close, it was clear that her actions had not only deflected the immediate threat of the massive fine, but had also inspired a nationwide conversation about the balance of power, the role of individual agency in confronting institutional authority, and the enduring influence of eloquence, preparation, and integrity in shaping public perception, ultimately solidifying Jasmine Crockett's status as a formidable figure whose impact would reverberate far beyond the walls of the courtroom, making This encounter an enduring reference point for discussions on justice, advocacy, and the responsible exercise of authority,